Presenting now is Temitope Obalade. She is an early career scholar and ethnomusicologist. She holds a BA Music and MA in Music Theory and Composition from the University of Lagos and is currently pursuing her PhD in ethnomusicology from the Mountaintop University under the mentorship of Dr. Oladele Ayorinde. As a performer, she plays saxophone with the MFM High Life Band and sings with the Mountaintop Chorale at the Mountain of Fire and Miracles Ministries. As an educator, she teaches saxophone and voice performance at the Mountaintop University. Her research interests are in church music, Nigerian art music, and gender studies. She will be presenting Epistemic Negotiation and Musical Knowledge Production in Indigenous Nigerian Church Music. Notes on the life story of F.O. Oyebadejo.
Thank you. As a young boy, I was fascinated by the organ playing style of Baba Oyebadejo. I would be in church waiting for my father after every rehearsal, but my focus was always on the practice and performance of this man, so much so that I used to look forward to the anniversary of the CAC Ijesha Church, where he directs the choir to hear him play. That is from my personal communication with Bidemi Oyesoya, April 4, 2026. As I listened to Oyesoya recount his memories of Oyebadejo with zest and obvious joy, I could not help but reflect on the frequency with which I have heard the same kind of story from several interviewees during my fieldwork. From Olukoya to Oladele, renowned men of God, as well as musicians, testify to the ways that Oyebadejo's organ playing has ignited in them a hope and a thirst for more. However, Oyesoya's story hits deeper because he is the present chairman of music for the Christ Apostolic Church, Nigeria and overseas, and his father, Yinka Oyesoya, was an organist, choirmaster in CAC, and a contemporary of Oyebadejo. With this exposure and background in music, his story reflects the depth of impact that Oyebadejo was believed to have made on his direct contacts and the respect that is still accorded him today, decades after his death. In this presentation, I explore the life story of Festus Olusegun Oyebadejo, 1936 to 2005. An organist, choirmaster, composer, arranger, and music educator whose musical life unfolded largely within the Christ Apostolic Church in Lagos. Although he never occupied the prominence accorded many conservatory-trained Nigerian composer, his influence was deeply embedded in the everyday musical practices of the indigenous church. Through choir rehearsals, organ accompaniment, composition, arrangement, and the informal training of younger musicians, Oyebadejo cultivated a musical tradition that extended far beyond written scores or institutional recognition. His work exemplifies the creative labor through which indigenous church musicians appropriated inherited missionary forms and reworked them through local liturgical, cultural, and spiritual contexts. It is this process that makes his life particularly significant for this study. In many accounts of Nigerian music history, scholarly attention has understandably focused on missionary hymnody, conservatory-trained composers, cathedral music traditions, and the development of formal music institutions. Amojola 1995, Sado 2029, and others. These studies have enriched our understanding of Nigerian musical modernity and the complex encounters between African and European musical traditions. Yet they have also left relatively unexplored or underexplored the everyday musical worlds of indigenous churches, where countless musicians were teaching, composing, arranging, improvising, and transmitting musical knowledge beyond the boundaries of formal institutions. It is this observation that forms the starting point of my presentation today as I ask, what does the life story of Oyebadejo reveal about how knowledge is constituted in indigenous settings? How can we see him as an embodiment of musical knowledge and a system of knowledge production? To explore these questions, I draw on oral interviews with members of Oyebadejo's family, former choristers, church leaders, and musicians who worked closely with him. These conversations are read alongside archival materials, musical manuscripts, church documents, and recordings where available. Together, these sources allow us to reconstruct not only the life of one remarkable musician, but also the wider musical world in which he lived and worked. Ultimately, if we pay closer attention, I argue that if we pay closer attention to the lives of musicians such as Oyebadejo, we begin to see indigenous church music differently. It emerges not simply as a repertoire for worship, but as a dynamic site where musical knowledge is continually created, negotiated, embodied, and transmitted. I will explore his career in 3 stages below. The first dimension of Oyebadejo's career is found in his work as a composer and arranger. Although relatively few of his manuscripts survive today, oral testimonies and archival evidences consistently point to his significant contribution to the musical repertoire of the Christ Apostolic Church. During interviews with Timothy Adegbaju, a contemporary of Oyebadejo in Ile-Ife, and Kayode Oyebadejo, his first son, Oyebadejo was attributed the first melodic and harmonic refinement of the CAC Sunday School anthem, composed by Solomon Gbadebo, who worked closely with him at the time of the composition. Many other compositions of Gbadebo were said to have also been arranged and notated by Oyebadejo. Femi Adedeji, 2012, in his article, The Indigenous Music of Christ Apostolic Church in Nigeria and the Diasporas, a proof of Christian transformative musicality, attributed 3 hymn tunes, hymns 124, 467, and 477, in the 1990 edition of the CAC hymn book as original compositions of Oyebadejo. D.K. Olukoya, who was a member of the Central Choir under the leadership of Oyebadejo in the 70s, recalled that Oyebadejo's hymn compositions are of great significance to him because although they were written in Yoruba language, they still followed the meter and rhymes found in Western hymns, where, as in poetry, the last word of each line is homophonic to the one before it or after it. Olukoya sang one of his hymn tune titled Ninu Gbogbo Ijitinja to me at the interview. The original score of that song is no longer available, but it is an adaptation of Hugh Stowell's From Every Stormy Wind That Blows in Yoruba with a new tune, harmonic arrangement, and Yoruba poetry. The displayed hymn on the screen was discovered as written in one of the old hymn books, and although this was written in English, it is an evidence that Oyebadejo wrote hymns, and some of them lie today in people's memories, like the one sung to me by Dr. D.K. Olukoya. According to S.O. Oladele, the current president of the Christ Apostolic Church, Nigeria and overseas, Oyebadejo and his contemporaries composed several cantatas and anthems performed by their choristers during Christmas, Easter, and choir anniversaries every year. He also sang many of those tunes to me from memory. For the archival section of my ongoing doctoral work, all of these have been recorded and will be transcribed and archived. From the above, it is evident that Oyebadejo composed and harmonized numerous indigenous and liturgical songs that became embedded in congregational worship. Rather than treating composition as the creation of entirely new musical material, Oyebadejo often walked through adaptation and arrangement, reinterpreting inherited melodies to meet the liturgical and spiritual needs of indigenous worship. As Bode Omojola argues, Nigerian musical modernity is frequently expressed through adaptation and performance, rather than through original composition alone. In this sense, Oyebadejo's arrangements were acts of musical creativity that negotiated missionary musical forms within Yoruba Christian practices. Number 2 is performance as an organist. The organ as performance, pedagogy, and knowledge. The second dimension of his career was his artistry at the organ. Interviewees rarely described Oyebadejo simply as an accomplished performer. They record what happened whenever he sat behind the instrument. His organ playing was simultaneously performance, teaching, and spiritual ministry. Whenever Oyebadejo played on the organ, I used to wonder what kind of man he was, because to me, his skills were completely out of the world. That was Olukoya, 2025. Choir rehearsals became classrooms where harmony, accompaniment, voice leading, and improvisations were demonstrated rather than merely explained. Younger musicians learned by listening, observing, repeating, and participating. Some willing young people and less experienced organists would wait after rehearsals to hear him play, ask him questions, and request for clarity about any part of the organ. That was from my personal communication with S.O. Ige, 2026. Larry Adekunle recalls that Oyebadejo trained choristers in music theory, introduced classical repertoire, mentored organists, and cultivated disciplined rehearsal practices that shaped himself, his music career, and generation of other church musicians. He was once said to have declared, "Give me the organ, and I will bring sinners to their knees," as the church prepared for a crusade. That was from my personal communication with Adegbaju, August 31, 2025. This statement encapsulates his understanding of music as both artistic expression and spiritual persuasion. The organ therefore became more than a colonial liturgical instrument. It became a post-colonial space where indigenous musical knowledge was embodied, transmitted, and continually recreated through practice. And the third part of his work, spiritual leadership, discipline, and collaborative ministry. Perhaps the most enduring dimension of Oyebadejo's career was his spiritual character. Every interview conducted for this study emphasized not only his musicianship, but also his discipline, humility, and unwavering commitment to handle rehearsal with seriousness. He didn't mind that one person was his son or they were married. He would mete out punishment for lateness and every act of perceived unseriousness. Musical excellence for him was inseparable from spiritual integrity. It demanded punctuality, rigorous rehearsal, and technical precision, not for personal recognition, but because music was an act of worship. S.O. Oladele mentioned his refusal to play the Hallelujah chorus for their choir anniversary at Olugbode, Ibadan, because, in his words, they were singing adulterated Hallelujah chorus. His influence also extended beyond the churches where he served. He collaborated extensively with central choirs across Lagos, worked alongside prominent choir leaders such as Yinka Oyesonya, Solomon Gbadebo, among others. He introduced orchestral practices into congregational worship and mentored musicians whose influence spread throughout the denomination. These collaborations demonstrate that musical knowledge was never produced in isolation, but emerged through communities of practice, shared worship, and collective creativity. Taken together, these three dimensions, composition and arrangement, organ performance, and spiritual leadership, demonstrate that Oyebadejo's significance cannot be reduced to biography alone. His life exemplifies how indigenous church musicians negotiated inherited musical traditions while producing new forms of musical knowledge that continue to shape Christian worship in contemporary Nigeria. Through his work, the church became not merely a site of worship, but a living institution of musical knowledge, where sound, faith, and community converged to produce distinctly post-colonial African Christian modernity. Now, reading Oyebadejo through Mbembe. To further expand this presentation, I draw on actually Mbembe's 2001 reflections on the post-colony and more broadly his intervention into African knowledge production. Mbembe challenges persistent representations of Africa as a passive recipient of ideas, institutions, and histories produced elsewhere. Instead, he argues that African societies are active sites of intellectual labor where inherited structures are appropriated, reinterpreted, and invested with new meanings. The post-colony in this sense is not merely a historical period after colonial rule, but a condition in which Africans continually negotiate inherited colonial forms while creating new ways of knowing and inhabiting the world. This perspective offers an important way of understanding indigenous church music in Nigeria. Missionary Christianity introduced hymnody, staff notation, organ accompaniment, and institutional ideas about sacred music. Yet, indigenous churches, such as the Christ Apostolic Church, did not simply reproduce these traditions. Through everyday worship, rehearsals, composition, arrangement, performance, church musicians reworked inherited musical forms in ways that reflected local aesthetics, spiritual experience, and communal practice. Music, therefore, became more than a liturgical expression. It became a medium through which knowledge was negotiated and recreated. It is within this context that I use the term epistemic negotiation. By this, I refer to the ongoing process through which indigenous church musicians appropriate inherited musical traditions without merely replicating them. Reading Oyebadejo's life through Mbembe's post-colonial concept, therefore, shifts the focus away from biography as the story of an individual. Instead, his life became an ethnographic window into the everyday production of post-colonial musical knowledge. His career demonstrates that indigenous church musicians were not simply custodians of traditions. They were intellectual actors whose everyday musical practices contributed and is still contributing to the making of African Christian modernity. Indigenous church music, therefore, is not merely a repertoire for worship. It is a living institution of musical knowledge, which today we can see in rehearsals, in performance, in the memory of people who have been through it, in pedagogy, and in the community at large. So today, I would conclude that the significance of biography of musicians like Oyebadejo is not only in the compositions they wrote or the choirs they directed, but in worship, in performance, and everything that has become interconnected modes of knowing. Thank you.
Thank you for walking us through the epistemology, negotiation, and musical knowledge production in indigenous Nigerian church music. Notes on the life story of F.O. Oyebadejo. Thank you. Is there anyone with question? Okay.
Thank you very much for that beautiful presentation. Rich and well presented. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would want you to please throw some more light on his training as a musician.
Okay.
Then I'd like also to ask, I know I once had a study in gospel music, and from what I observed or what I found out, a name that occurred over and over as a pioneer in gospel, an individual as a pioneer in gospel music, is more of Akinpelu. So in the line of, CAC musicians, where is Oyebadejo one of the pioneers, or it came much later? What generation does it belong? Okay. Then finally, you talked about the organ. Well, my little knowledge makes me know that it seems the harmonium came before the organ to Nigeria. So did Oyebadejo play on the organ, on the harmonium as well as the organ, or it was just on the organ all through? Okay. Thank you very much.
So I did a presentation on Oyebadejo at the last symposium, and that was where I talked about his, early life and his education. So just to answer that question, Oyebadejo was born to an organist. His father was an organist. In fact, the first organist in CAC Ile-Ife. When CAC just started. That's More, that's their headquarters. So he was a child when his father would place him on his lap while he was practicing. So he learned like that, and then he came to secondary school at CMS Grammar School, and because of his knowledge already, he was very close to the music teacher. The music teacher will allow him to go to the class, to the organ room, and practice. And then his father realized that he was becoming too invested in music rather than his education. So he moved him back to Ile-Ife just so he can focus on his education. And when he went back there, he also continued that from there. So he really never went to any music school. Yes. So the only few period he had with a teacher that could look institutional was that time he was at CMS Grammar School for 2 years before his father moved him back. So, and then after all of that, all the interview documentation says that he practices for a long time. 8 hours, 6 hours, and all of that when he was. So that was where he got his knowledge from, on the organ. And then about the harmonium, while going through his archives, I realized that he played a lot of, because not all of these things that we have today were available at the time. He played keyboard, he played this harmonium you're talking about, he played the organ, I went through all of it, all the things I could find in his library just presented to me. So I realized that he played through many of those things. And those times they were even playing, I don't know why they call it organ, that do not have manuals. That do not have the so it was the man that I interviewed was saying the first keyboard he played, the first organ he played there do not have pedals and all of that. So that is it. He played through all of that. And then for your third question, yes, Oyebadejo was born in 1936. So his performance, his activities were mainly between 1960 to 1980, 1990. You understand? So by 1970, all the period after his secondary school education, he was going from one Anglican church to another Catholic church to another, to play on, to gather experience. And then at the end of the day, he retired back to his home church in CAC. And all of that experiences shaped him, to become who he was. So at that time, all of these people you were mentioning were already functioning. But because he was very, fertile according to what all the interviewees said, people were allowing him to, come to everywhere he wanted to play.
Thank you. I want to take this question online from Dr. Shola Adeshola. He said, considering the increasing influence of global worship music and digital technologists, how can the epistemic model exemplified by F.O. Oyebadejo inform the composition, teaching, preservation, and performance of indigenous Nigerian church music in the 21st century?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ishola, for that question. Okay, so yes, like we say, time is evolving. The time where Oyebadejo, lived in is different from her. So we have a lot of technological. So we're not saying go back to what was being done at that time. What we are saying is just that we should not, throw them away, because these people have done a lot for our musical, indigenous music. Yes. So his method of both performance and pedagogy can be useful today in places where you do not have the opportunity to, formalize institutions. You understand? Maybe for any reason there are no opportunities for that. And also for people who are already busy with something else, maybe they are in one, like for instance, people who are, let's say, doctors, and they want to study this thing, they like it. We are going to now use the advantage of our own 21st century, technology, AI, online classes, social media, and all of that, to help them to even get this faster than it was at that time. At that time, you had to go to church to listen to him.
Thank you. You have short meeting. The last question, Prof. raised up his hand.
Just a very quick question. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. Do we have any recording or something?
Yes.
Because you said, Dr. Olukoya sang a song. I was hoping you just say, look at the song,
Okay.
It's all...
This is a recording of him with the Central Choir in Lagos District. This song was composed by Oyesoya, but he was the one on the organ there. So that is just to show his collaboration with other people. Yes. So I also have some of his compositions that have been sung. This is his performance. Can you play this? This is his performance as an organist.
So, you see, it's about the materiality, especially talking about side of knowledge production. That organ playing, you could engage with it. What is unique about it? So, engaging with material is important, and you have those materials. So, again, bringing theory to more concretely engage with material, and then we can see how knowledge is produced in performance, in music, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for being a wonderful audience. Nice audience.